We're in the CPP study break, as you guys are well aware. Hey, there's Sally. We are talking about today with Ron. We're going to talk about the differences between RAW and JPEGs and some of the characteristics of RAW and some of the characteristics of JPEG, when you should use each. Ron's been gracious enough to put a nice presentation together for us on that. But as always, I'd like to open it up, make sure that any questions are to people coming in are put out there first. You are our first priority. So if we have any questions about the process, I know Eva is getting ready to submit her technical images. And Don's getting ready, even as quiet as he is, he's getting ready to become a liaison. So if he has any liaison questions, you just been voluntold, Don. Sorry, just like Sally did to me.
Yeah.
Chuck to me.
Yeah, Sally just grabbed our hands and said, "Come on, you're going to a meeting."
That's right. Welcome, everybody. So we'll open up for the floor to any questions. Anybody have any questions?
No.
Okay. Even one thing you may want to think about is as you finish up getting your CPP, there's also the renewal process that happens. Was it 3 years later? You got to get renewed, and so you got to make sure you keep your eye on the ball and what you need to get done during that 3 years to make sure your renewal goes smoothly.
Yeah.
So
step by step. Yeah.
Yep.
First, I want the evaluation be successful, and then.
There you go.
And I'm going to remind everybody, if you can rename yourself so that we know where you're at in the process and where you're from. That is awesome help to us here on the call. So if there's no questions about where you are in the process or where you're going with what you have, we can turn it over to Ron.
Okay. No questions? Deb, do you have any questions? You're okay, Deb?
I am okay right now. No questions right now.
Okay,
hi, everybody.
I thought Deb would come with a fistful of questions after last night.
Not yet. Give me a moment, Chris.
Okay. All right. Well, what I've done to kind of approach this whole question about RAW is I put together a little PowerPoint presentation that I can share with you now. That will hopefully take you through what's going on, but also will maybe spur some conversation. So let me share that screen here with you now. That's screen 1. Share. Okay. Do you see the PowerPoint presentation?
Yes, we do.
Okay. What's this I hear about RAW? Okay. A couple of things let's talk about what the common RAW files are, just so we know we'll recognize what a RAW file looks like. We'll define what the RAW image is and what makes it, how it works. We'll look at software to access those RAW files and common approaches for that. I'll look at some RAW versus JPEG and how that differs, and especially focusing on the advantages of using RAW. And then I've got a couple of questions I pulled off the practice exam that we can put out there and review those. So it should go pretty quick. I want to go through this quickly, and then we can come back and we can all answer questions and do a lot of discussion about it. Materials, almost all the material I got from I'm calling London Stone Upton book, because Stone is tucked in the middle there and they get overlooked. So, but that's the book that the PPA recommends for everybody to use all the time. So RAW file formats, what are they? Well, everybody uses their own, okay? Canon has, I think it's CS2. Nikon is NEF, Pentax is PEF, Sony is ARW. And then we got this one out there is a DNG file, okay? But everybody tends to use their own. And depending upon your software, you have to have the decoder, if you will, to take that RAW file and interpret it back into an image. So unless you have the right decoder, then it may not be able to open the file. So for example, with my Nikon, I have an NEF file for my D3S, would not open until I updated my Photoshop to include the decoder portion, which would manage that new camera model. Okay, so it's kind of complicated. I'm bringing Adobe DNG into it because that's open source, and what that means is that lots of stuff can open it. Makes it, if you can, whatever format you've got to start with, if you can get it into a DNG, convert it to a DNG file, you'll be more than likely able to open it regardless of whatever your software you're using. This DNG file converter, it's a separate program. It's free. You can download it there at the hyperlink. And if somebody wants to grab that and tell, let me see if I can do it. Oh, no, I can't do it. Okay. But I will put that in the text during conversation. But you can go ahead and download. It's a free program, so it doesn't cost you anything. But that lets you take whatever. Like I take all my NEF file, convert them over to the DNG files, then I can open them up easily. Doesn't matter what camera model I've got. Okay, so that's the only reason that's in there. Definition: what is a raw image? Okay, it's an image that is in as pure a form as possible, i.e., with the least amount of modification possible to create a viewable image on your computer screen. That's from pages 97 and 162 of your London and Upton book. Okay. Now, what does as pure form as possible mean? Well, what that means, I got a little picture down here. In this picture, that's a finished picture, but assume that was what you saw in your viewfinder of your camera. I want to just look at that little portion down there in the lower left corner where the green circle is. If I blow that up and I turn up to the pixels that the sensor would have, I've got the Bayer pattern on my sensor and I've got light hitting that, right? And somehow it's got to take that array of information and turn that into an image that has tonality. And so it goes through this whole process to then go back over and convert a square into a single, assign a particular RGB value to a single pixel on your screen. Okay, but it can't be red, green, or blue. It's got to be some color in the color gambit. And so that little green grass down there that I show on the left now has been isolated. And then what I show you on the right is how it would appear on a pixel per pixel basis on your computer screen. So that's the minimal processing that the computer has to do to be able to show you a picture off of that raw file. So it converts the Bayer pattern into an image with mixed colors for each pixel. It also applies a white balance. That's why when you go in to do your Sherman images, you can apply a white balance and it carries through onto the raw file that you are bringing up on your screen, and they check for that. It applies a luminance. It adjusts the luminance and the tones. Does that using the camera color profile that you've loaded into your raw program. A lot of those are standard. It also increases the contrast in your shadows and decreases the contrast in your highlights. It does this automatically. And it's all an attempt to try to make what comes up on your screen look like what you actually see with your eye. Has it corrects for lens distortion. And then also it applies a sharpening step too. All that stuff gets done outside of your control, just to be able to create the image that you have on your screen. Now, beyond that, you can do things like additional white balancing and everything else. But this is the minimal. This is what the least amount of modification is required to get that into a picture on your screen for you to look at. Okay. So it's not that it doesn't do anything. It has to do something with it. And that's the minimal. Okay. How do you access them? Well, you can go into Lightroom, and when you open a raw file up in Lightroom, it'll launch what looks like a Adobe Camera Raw program. I don't think it's labeled that way, but it pulls it up, and then you can open it from there right into Photoshop. You can capture one similar sort of thing, go into Photoshop, or I'm old school. I use Adobe Bridge. And when I do Adobe Bridge and I open a file in Adobe Bridge, it opens up Adobe Camera Raw for me. And then when I say open there, then it opens it up into Photoshop. Now, one characteristic thing about all these raw processes is that they tend to create this little, if you look at a file that has, or a folder that has 10 images in it, and you start opening them up, you're going to start seeing extra files appear there. Those extra files are called sidecar files. And what they are is they're little XMP, they're little text files. And what they do is they carry with them all of the changes that you've made to that raw image. So not only do you have the raw image, now you've got this little sidecar file that's associated with it, has the same file name, just this .xmp file. And that gets carried along with that. So when you open it up into Photoshop, it will take that raw file, apply the changes in your XMP file, and then open it up into Photoshop. So it's now a modified image. Okay. Really cool thing about that is if you ever want to get back to the original file, you just delete out the XMP file and the computer thinks it's a brand new file and it goes back to the original unmodified version, is what you would then see come up if you open it up again. But that little sidecar file is, and I'm saying many create the XMP files. And the reason I say many is because if you have a DNG file, it does not. With a DNG file converter, when you create that DNG file, it actually will take and bury, if you will, the changes in with the modified picture alongside the unmodified version in the same file. So all your files double in length every time you open one up and save it as a DNG file. So in order to get back to the original from there, all you do is you go back into Adobe Camera Raw and you hit extract. And it'll separate the two and bring out the original again for you so that you can, you know, get back to your starting point. So it's not a big deal. It's still available. It's just you got to go through that extra step. A key thing here is when you set up your DNG file converter, you got to hit your change preferences and then make sure you check off this little embed original raw file. That's the only way that makes sure that that original stays connected to the modified version in the same file. Okay. If you do not check that, it will then replace the original raw file with a modified version of that raw file. Okay. And then you can't extract it to go recover it because there's no original image in there to pull out. It is a memory saver if you do not embed the original. The files are smaller because you're not getting doubled to begin with. And I almost never worry about saving the original. I almost never embed it. I usually march on.
Deb has a question.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Deb.
I'm sorry, I didn't know if we can ask questions now
Oh, yeah,
or wait
yeah.
for your presentation. Okay, I'm glad you're talking about this because I needed to send someone one of my images in raw file, and I exported it from Lightroom in the original form, which is the raw file. But then I did see that other XMB. I never knew what that was, so I was just trashing it. Is that okay?
Well, if you can trash that if you don't plan on using the image with any modifications. I mean, literally, it takes the original image and says, okay, the XMP file says I sharpened it, I changed my white balance, so it's a text file. It just lists off those things and it lists what the values you changed them to right there. If you delete that XMP file, right, then what they're going to get. And the only way we can open that is to get back to the original file, the original unmodified file. Okay. So if you opened it up in Lightroom and it had made some changes to it and all that, and you wanted to send that changed version to them, and all you sent them was the raw file, then they're not going to see the changes you put in. Because,
so if I wanted to show them the changes, I would have to send them both files.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Got it.
And I understand with some of these programs, they don't necessarily make that raw file real obvious where it's at. Sometimes I was talking to somebody yesterday trying to confirm some of this, and his raw files do not appear alongside the original's raw file. It stores them somewhere else. So that means if he might have a hard time finding that raw file or finding that sidecar file.
XMB.
So just be aware of that. But I would recommend, well, depending upon what they want to do with that, I'd be curious why they would want the raw file to begin with. But I'm very tight on sending out anything in raw form.
Yeah, it was one image that they were telling me that my light was how I had clamshell, and he was trying to teach me where I can see the light in her eyes and where it needed to be and where I had it positioned. So I don't know why he needed the raw file for that, but
yeah, I mean you can open up the raw file and just resave it as a JPEG file, and for that purpose you could probably get away with it. You don't need all the advantages of raw. But
Yeah,
yeah, so
okay.
DNG file converters are
Because
really
I don't
handy.
like sending my raw files either. So
Oh, it is huge. Why do they need that much information? Okay, so why use RAW versus JPEG? Well, first reason is because you got a finer gradation of intensity. So you got a lot more tones in between black and white, a lot more options in between black and white. And the other one is because you don't lose data. See, every time you open a file and you save a file in JPEG, it approximates. The JPEG process compresses photo by discarding pixels determined to be unnecessary. Okay, that's a direct quote from London and Upton. That's an easy way to kind of think about that. It goes through the file and it tries to figure out what's important, what's not, and it gets it. Now, every time you open up a file, right, it's opening something from the hard drive. When you resave it, it approximates it differently. So every time you open and save a JPEG file, it has to reinterpret and then compress it back down again. It does it a little bit differently each time. And over time, you're going to see that photo degrades because the approximations just accumulate over time. Okay. And you're going to start getting JPEG artifacts and all sorts of crazy stuff. RAW does not do that. RAW saves every pixel. So when you open up a RAW file and you save RAW, or you do Photoshop, anything that's lossless will not degrade your image. You can open it up and save it as many times as you want, and it's not going to degrade the image because it's saving it on a per pixel basis. No approximation about it. Okay. So that's the lossless data. The finer gradation, big thing is JPEG files are 8-bit depth. Deb, are you super comfortable around like bit depth on computers?
a little bit. We went
Okay,
over
well,
this in our class on Sunday.
okay, well, computers operates on ones and zeros, right? And
Yeah.
so if I need to communicate something other than a 1 or a 0, so we take this chunk of data that's called 8 bits, okay? So it's eight sequential numbers of either 1 or 0, okay? And if I do 8, I can have 256 possible combinations of 1s and 0s that are unique to describe that list of eight 1s or 0s, okay? But if I've only got 8, I can only have 256 levels because that's all I can make is unique, that many unique combinations. Well, RAW now lets you go up to more. And after an extensive discussion with some folks over at Dodd Camera and a couple other places, if you get into RAW, you can shoot RAW 8-bit, but it opens the door to being able to use more bits. So now I can go up to 10 or even up to 14 bits. And I heard one more. There was even a higher one the other day or yesterday. That was even higher. But obviously, with the higher bits, you pay a price for that in the form of performance because now it takes longer to process the image, right? And you also pay the price in file size because now with that much more data, it takes up that much more memory. So you do pay a price for that. But if you go up to 14 bits now of data, you can get to 16,384 different unique levels. Okay, so what that lets me do is instead of having to pick black or white or 2 shades of gray that are separated by some intensity difference, I now have choices in between now. So I've got a much easier way to pick out the exact intensity level of that pixel that I want to aim for. I don't have to choose the higher or the lower option. I can go right for that specific one a lot more easily if I got 16,384 choices versus 256. Now, the human eye can only see about 100 easily. Okay, so you say, well, I got plenty. Well, the big problem is when you get into an image and you want to look at spatially where things are in the image. That's where the extra levels helps out. Okay, so this is another way of thinking about that. This is showing you a bit of 1 or 0. So 1 is black, a 0 is white, right? And this is the image it would create if it were printed. It's either black or white. This is the way newspapers work. This is the way newspapers are printed. They're printed with dots, black dots or nothing. So, but that's exactly how that works. They do 1 bit, right? 2 bits get you more choices. 3 bits get you even more, right? You get all the way up to 8 now down here, and you see you've got what looks like a fairly good gradation of choices there now. And what that does is it takes you from that black and white picture up on top down to the eyeball that now has tonality. So now you can start to see the individual eyelashes in the different areas, and it's not all in the eyeball. You can start to see the iris a little bit and everything, and it's more detail in there. So you've got a lot more tonality. That's the advantage of going from 1 to 8-bit, right? Now, you want to talk about color? Well, we got 1 to 8 bits per color. Now you can start creating an RGB image now that shows you color as well as, you know, intensity. Okay, and so that's what's on the bottom there. That's all talking 8-bit. Now we get to 14-bit, we're talking 4.4 trillion colors possible with 16,384 levels for each one of those red, green, and blue colors. So that gives us a lot more space. So, you know, why the heck should I care about that? I mean, if I can see the picture great in 8-bit, why do I really care about going any higher? Okay. Here's why I think you need to. The high bit depth advantage is you don't lose as much detail when you need high dynamic range. So for example, when you're out there and you're shooting a wedding and you've got the groom out there in a dark suit, you got the bride out there in a nice white dress, right? And you don't want to lose detail in the suit and you don't want to lose detail in the dress, right? You're gonna have to work. You can't satisfy both, you know, not easily. So you had to usually you'd sacrifice the groom for capturing, not blowing out the bride's dress, because the bride's paying for the pictures. so you'd have to make a compromise, right? Well, or a bright sunny day with harsh shadows. And I had this the other day, guy wears a white shirt outside in the sun. So now if I don't want to blow out his shirt, you know, then I got to darken everything up, and that makes things hard in the background because everything's all dark again. So the high dynamic range situations are crazy. So what the RAW does for you when using 14-bit is it lets you go in and it gives you more possible levels to brighten or lower the extremes in your exposure range. So for example, what I've done here is I've blocked off the bottom 10% and the top 10%. And in that bottom 10%, those are generally the areas where it gets dark and you're going to lose all the detail in the shadows, or it gets so bright that you lose all the details in the highlights, right? So naturally what we want to do is we want to go back in there and say, well, can I brighten up the shadows, or can I tone down the highlights, right? So we always like to pull our sliders around to pull them down or bring them up. And what this tells me is that, well, if I'm at 8 bits, I've only got 25 levels there to pull up. So if I pull those up, I'm going to end up potentially, like here's the example of the sky here. I don't know if you can see it on your screen like I can mine, but you have banding in here. And what that is this may have been a picture where you brighten it up to try to I'm sorry, this one here, you might have tried to darken it down, say, to be able to bring the sky in. And you took your 25 levels that you had up there in the top end, and now you spread them out over half the exposure range. And so now the gap, the distance between each of those levels is so tight that you end up with distinct levels of that color throughout the image. And it just doesn't work. Well, now if you'd shot that in 14-bit RAW, where now instead of 25 levels, you can now have 1,638 levels just in that top 10%, bring them down, stretch them back down into the darker range. You have a lot more than 25 levels of choices. Therefore, now that sky looks a lot more like it should, like if you'd shot it, you know, exposing just for the sky itself. Okay. So that's the advantage of shooting RAW is it gives you the ability to brighten up the shadows or darken down the highlights without getting yourself into a banding situation. And that's the I find is really useful. And if you do end up accidentally, you know, over or under exposing a picture, you know, it might have been the right exact time and you had to take it quick and you just didn't have a chance to set your settings correct exactly right on target. This gives you a chance to be able to go back there and potentially recover that picture, because we know there's theory and the way you should do it, and then there's real life too. And sometimes the moment is just, it's worth the moment's not going to wait for you to find your settings, so you just got to go for it. So, but that's the advantage of using the raw images. So I had a couple of practice exams here, or practice exam. This is question number 15 out of 50. Okay. And you can sign into the PPA and download the whole 50 question practice exam at the website there. And we'll put that into the chat here in a minute. And I'm going to give that to you because it's kind of a pain to find on their website, kind of a pain. So I'll pop that out there for you. But what is the benefit of working in 16-bit over 8-bit in Photoshop? What do you think the answer is? The gradation between the colors is smoother, so banding is prevented. The mode is more widely accepted by third-party software. Images have more resolution, so they can be printed larger, or the file sizes will be smaller. What do you think the right answer is?
A.
You just talked about this as A.
Yes, answer A, yay! And they actually give the reference. So the nice thing about the exam is they give the reference for where that specific piece of information was brought from, and that was from this reference, Ben Long, The Complete Digital Photography Book, 8th edition on page 99. So yeah, that's exactly one. Okay, the other question I found in the practice exam was this one. What would be the result of changing from 16 back down to 8-bit color space? Colors would become lighter, the colors would become darker, the gamut of colors would be reduced, or the gamut of available colors would be increased. What do you think is the right answer there?
C.
C.
You go from
That's
16.
London and Upton on page 102 to 103. So yeah, good job. You guys got both of those right. I didn't create any extra problems because sometimes I think you can get in trouble by either making them too challenging or too simple. So I want to encourage everybody who's look through the exams, look for the NEF or the raw questions. These are the only two I found in the 50. I know there's a couple of other resources out there where you can get more extensive practice exams. I'm sure you're going to find questions in there as well. But that's all I had for my particular information to spark a conversation. So what do you guys think?
So I got a couple things. First off, there's I put in the chat the DNG converter you were talking about.
Good, thank you.
It's both for the Windows and Mac version are both in there. And Sally posted in the chat some more discussion about bit depth. It's a pretty long read there, but if it, that's probably stuff you took that from the book, Sally.
I didn't. I took it from Adobe, from the Adobe site.
Okay, all right. And James and John both. Hey, that's kind of biblical. James and John both posted the link to the credential for the CPP exam, the test exam or sample exam. And here's an example of we never quit learning even after we stopped studying for the exam. I've got a few questions for you, Ron.
Sure.
Since you're the expert of the day. Adobe, is there a difference? What is the difference between a DNG and a PNG? Is a PNG a raw file?
I believe a PNG. I do not believe PNG is a raw file, and the reason I don't is because the PNG file actually lets you have a transparent background. Okay, so where if it's a raw file and has image data for the entire image, then obviously it wouldn't be absent. Okay. So I think that's the big difference. So a lot of times when you want to take a graphic or something and drop it in on top of something else, and you don't want the background to be carried with it or have to mask it out, you'll save that component as a PNG file, and that makes it a lot easier to manipulate around.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then the next one, actually two are kind of related. You were talking very early on about terms like sharpen, clarity, contrast, brighten, saturation, hue, which in Nikon language are all part of the picture control. And then also I want to know if both that and your color space, is that translated in your raw file in the Sidecar?
Yeah, I mean, in order to go back and create that first image you see on your screen, that's part of the minimal processing, and that Adobe standard color space. is one that and remember on the Sherman images, you have to select the Adobe standard color space. It has to have some starting point to work from. Okay. And so what that'll do is that will take and it will massage the raw data that comes off your sensor and turn it into that picture, but it has to start off with some starting point for a lot of those aspects. The camera color profile, for instance, it has to have something to work with. It sharpens a little bit as a process of trying to get it off the Bayer pattern and put it into a pixel picture on your screen. Changes your contrast. And the way the Leonard Upton captures it, all those are intentions to try to take what you saw in your camera on the view screen and turn it into something on your computer screen that looks like a picture. If it didn't do that, then what you came up on the back of your camera on your computer screen would not look like a photograph. It would look weird. But each of the pixels on your screen has an RGB value. Okay. And on your Bayer pattern, obviously it's either red, green, or blue. So somehow you got to take that broken out pattern and turn it into a overlap pattern on your computer screen. So it will measure whatever sensor. Let's say you've got a green sensor. It will measure the green intensity on that sensor. Okay. But then as part of the image processing, it looks at all the other cells around it and it calculates what the contribution of the red and the blue would be into that green pixel, and then adds that in as a mathematical process. And that's where it gets into an RGB value for each pixel. So the first color is measured directly, the other two are calculated to put that in there. And that's all the processing that the RAW does to try to create a picture that you can look at that has individual pixels with individual RGB values.
Okay, so the answer to that question is where I'm finding those things is in at least in the Nikon language, in the Nikon menu, is in the picture control. I think it's the same in Canon as well.
Right.
Okay. And then the one last thing, and this is just meant to kind of start discussion. You talked a little bit about JPEG, but not a whole lot.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me the difference between a JPEG that the camera creates and then the JPEG that's embedded natively in a RAW file.
Ooh, good question. Good question. I'm not sure I can answer that thoroughly. The JPEG on the back of your camera, you'll have options on your camera to change the saturation, to change the contrast. Nikon has something called D-lighting, where it tries to apply contrast automatically. It has all these options you have. And the image you see on the back of your camera will have all of those things applied. Okay. The file that saves on your camera is the JPEG file that saves on your camera will have all of those things applied. Okay. The RAW file will not. The RAW file will be as minimal as possible. So if you pumped up your saturation by going into your menus and pumping it up, the JPEG file on your camera will have that, but the RAW file will not. Now, once you get that off into your computer, I don't know. I would expect that the JPEG file on your computer would carry along those same changes, and you could work forward from there. Realize though that by saving it as a JPEG file on your camera, right, you've already gone through one step of degradation, because it's going to approximate, it's going to try to figure out what data is relevant, what data is not, and only save the relevant data. And that's the way it compresses files down and saves you memory spaces, because it throws out data that it thinks is irrelevant. Okay, so you've already, just saving it on the camera, you've gone through one degradation step. Copying that off the camera and onto the computer, that'll go okay because you're copying it bit by bit. But as soon as you open up that JPEG file in Camera Raw or in Photoshop, you've now degraded it again, because it's trying to reinterpret what was saved and expand it out to fill every pixel on the screen. Now, when you save that JPEG file again, it's going to try to figure out what's relevant and what's not again. So it's going to throw out different data and save it down to the computer. So now you've got something that's been degraded 3 times already. And all you've done is open it up once to modify it and save it again. So it's already been degraded 3 steps. Now, I don't want to send out the worry that, gosh, if I open it 5 times, it's going to look terrible. That's not true. But it is a cumulative process. as you go in there and you edit it, if you edit a picture 15, 20 times, you will eventually start to see these JPEG artifacts crop up, and they're not going to help. They're not going to help the picture. They're going to degrade your picture. So that's the downside. RAW, anything in RAW, anything you save in Photoshop does not have that problem. Just don't save it as a JPEG file. Save it as a Photoshop files. You can open and close as much as you want, and you don't lose anything. Okay. I think I got kind of off topic there, but I mean, does that kind of answer the question?
Yep.
John, you're an especially techie guy. If you got some input on that, go for it, dude.
So in order to see the picture at all on the back of your camera, the camera processor inside has to convert the image from a raw image to a JPEG to display it.
Right.
And when you do that, it uses, as Chris said, the picture control, and it can correct for distortion, and it can use delighting or whatever to enhance contrast and white balance to adjust how it translates red, green, blue into the image that you see. And that is the image which gets saved, embedded in your raw file, so that when you're looking through in Explorer or Finder or something, it can show you the JPEG that's inside the raw, because it wouldn't necessarily process the raw, because that's quite a lot of work. But one of the things that I notice is that if I save raw files and JPEG as well, the JPEGs are instantly usable. You don't have to put them through a raw processing program, Lightroom or Photoshop or whatever you use. But if I try and create, if I start with a raw file in Lightroom or Photoshop, and I try and create the same JPEG that the camera created, I can never get it exact. So the recipe that Nikon or Canon use for creating their JPEG files in the camera and saving them as JPEGs, or saving that thumbnail in the raw file as a JPEG, that's a secret source. And if I try and do that, I can use Auto or whatever Adobe, products let you do to try and get the best contrast and the best color balance and all those kinds of things. But it does not look like the camera's JPEG, because that's their style of processing that the manufacturer has developed over decades and built into the chips inside the camera. And your CPU doesn't know that recipe. So your computer, your laptop or desktop, and the software that you use for image processing, you have to learn the recipe yourself if you want to try and match it. And sometimes I think the JPEGs from the camera are better than I can ever do processing a RAW. So some people like to use JPEGs because it's so fast and so quick. You can set the picture control if you want vivid or whatever you like, and you can set the contrast to boost inside the camera. So it can save a lot of time to use JPEGs. If you're just going to crop, maybe do a white balance adjustment, and print, then that's great. You don't have to go through all the effort that raw processing needs, because there can be quite a lot of skill and experience necessary to get a good result.
Good comments. Mia, you had comments?
Yeah, I had a couple of comments. I don't use, I use the cloud, so I don't see those files that you're talking about, because I think they're just built in now, on the 2021 cloud version of Adobe. So I'll be looking for those for those who use it that way and don't have, a stationary program on their computer that they use. Like you said, you were old school, so maybe you have to go through some things that we don't. And on John's comment, I was curious if both of you will do the in-depth where you would have the advantage of shooting with that RAW and that JPEG file, because I know a lot of headshot people that will do that, and they use that JPEG to show their client on the spot, this is kind of where we're going right here, and they're, it's easier. So
yeah, that is actually what when I do my headshots, I have it, I shoot wirelessly tethered using my Air Direct system, and I send over the low resolution JPEG file, because they only need to look at it about yay big on the screen.
right.
And we do all the selection of their positions, and then I'll use the raw file to go back and process that to get this tonality and everything else that I want. But yeah, I use a JPEG for selling to clients, right in front of them. Yeah. Right. Deb, did you have a comment?
I did. I had a question and a comment. I know we talked about JPEG and RAW. So when we're talking about TIFF files, is that just in between JPEG and RAW, or why do we use TIFF?
Well, TIFF is a lossless file, which means you don't lose any data. It saves every pixel. Okay. And that way you can transfer it and open it up and save it, and you don't have any degradation going on. TIFF is another format. I think it's used primarily in the publishing industry, and graphic artists like TIFF files. And that's also a file you can open up. And since I don't work in TIFF, that's a good question for that. I don't think TIFF is not considered a raw image file format, but it is considered lossless. Raw, you need to have a program that will open it up to then further it forward on into Photoshop. TIFF files you can open up directly in Photoshop. James, did I see your hand wave?
Yeah, it's also with the TIFF file, you can have a larger file than you can in Photoshop. Photoshop is limited. I can't remember the size, to like 40 gig or something like that, but TIFF doesn't have that limit on it.
Yeah.
So when I get a really big file in Photoshop, I convert it to TIFF, save it that way.
Yeah, TIFF files are pretty darn big, and so they aren't necessarily the ones that people gravitate to right off the bat, just because the files are so darn big. You know, they aren't emailable very easily and whatnot. So people like JPEG files for that, but there's
You can also save a TIFF with a transparent background.
I did not know that.
A TIFF file is tagged image file format, and the tags can tell the reader, whichever program, what kind of data there is in it. And a TIFF file could be an 8-bit black and white picture, or it could be a 24-bit RGB image, or it could be 16 bits per channel. So that's one of the reasons it's not exactly a RAW, because it's already been converted to RGB per pixel, but it can contain 16 bits per channel so that you get the maximum image depth, and you get the, as Ron was saying, you don't lose quality each time you save it. But it has a wide range of applications, and even in London, they think of it as a kind of one application. It can contain compressed data, but it's lossless compressed, so the file can be smaller. And James was saying about the maximum size for Photoshop, but Photoshop actually has two file formats that are native. One is PSD, the normal Photoshop data file that we are used to using. But when it gets to a 2 GB size, I mean, you shoot megapixels, but when you get images that are multi-layered with, as Chris was saying, the transparency or different layers that you're editing and blending, it can easily get to 2 GB. And then if you want to save that file in Photoshop native format, it will be PSB for Photoshop big format. So I've got images that are 200 GB, which is many editing. You know, when I do my light painting, I might have 60 or more high megapixel images all blended together.
You know, right now
I haven't seen PSB come up in any of the tests yet, but when they redo the exam every few years, and they're going to this next year, I hope that or it's quite possible that they'll be looking at the more modern technology that people come across.
Yeah, it's like right now I'm working on a banner for my local choir, a high school choir. I've got pictures of all the different choir groups up there. It's a 4-foot by 12-foot banner that's at minimum 250 DPI, and 4-foot by 12-foot, 250 DPI. That's well within your PSB file format size I need to work in. So it's not really that. You don't have to work on a project that big to exceed that limit. Yeah.
And also, Ron, when you were talking about saving files in Photoshop, you said you don't save it as a JPEG. You save it. I know I heard something about when you are saving files, you do a save. Do you do a save as versus save?
Well, save as is really if you want to go in and change the file name. Okay, so you save it as a different file name. Okay. For resaving the pictures, when you go open up an image in Photoshop and you start working on it, so say open up a picture in Camera Raw, bring it up into Photoshop, and you're working on it. You make some changes, you know, you can save that file to your hard drive as a PSD file, a Photoshop file.
PSD, okay.
Save it to that, and you can save it and open it and save it and open it, save it and open it as much as you want, and you will not degrade the picture. Okay.
Got it.
Because it's retaining all the information. But if you do JPEG, you see, at the very end of your work process, when you get the picture finally as you like it, that's the time to save it as a JPEG. Because that's the one that's going to be the one that's easily distributable and openable by a lot of other programs out there, and clients can pull up on their local computer, and they don't need Photoshop to read it or anything and like that. But that minimizes how much, if you will, damage that the compression process will do to the image, because you've only lost it one time on the end.
Got it.
Yeah, good question. Good question.
I see James laughing at my comment.
Yeah.
No, my
So,
business partner's over here telling me something funny. So
Because in the last update on Photoshop Cloud, they changed the way things save. And so there's like a couple of videos out now on how to save your files, because they changed it, and some people are lost their files, and it was quite a pain. Thank goodness I was on a downtime and it was focused on something else, and I wasn't saving during that so I could read that and view that first and not lose anything. It's like, oh my God.
One thing I want to point out though, I was talking about the advantages and being able to pull, brighten up the shadows or tone down the highlights to be able to, if you will, have one image capture both details and highlights and shadows. I doubt that'll be on the CPP exam, that level of question. But the reason I mention that is because I have had significant times when I can take the shot and I know I'm going to be okay, because I know I've got that tool in my back pocket, because I can go home and manage it and if you will, quote, rescue the picture or rescue the detail in both the highlights and the shadows within one shot. The other alternative, and I do this for real estate, is I'll bracket. I'll intentionally shoot at different shutter speeds. If the scene is stationary, I'll shoot different shutter speeds, so I end up with different exposures. And a lot of cameras are built in with bracketing already built into it. So that gives me even added assurance.
Hello,
Not
this
only
is
do I have
Chris.
the
I'm fine, Tom. How are you?
So not only do I have the advantage of the higher bit depth, but I also have the bracketing to help make sure I've got whatever exposure I could possibly need. But that concept of doing it is probably not going to be on the CPP exam. But
So one other thing, Ron, I was just trying to understand.
You are just a world of questions, aren't you? I love you.
This is a good topic. I like this. I mean, I like all the topics, but this one fascinates me. But when you were talking about the advantages of shooting in RAW versus JPEG, I mean, I get it. Most of the time I shoot in RAW. But when you were explaining the 14 up to 14 bit, you get up to 14 bits. Do you mean, I guess I'm trying to be able to explain, like, I'm trying to explain it to myself in my head. So versus a JPEG, you can get, it's only a minimum up to 8 bits for a JPEG, but then when you're shooting in RAW, you get all of that other extra bits up to the 14 bits, meaning you got all that other data or color space that you can work with when you shoot in RAW.
Yeah, exactly. And in the camera, you got a choice on the back. You can tell it, okay, camera, do I want to save just the JPEG files and that's it? And if I do, I'm going to see a certain number pop up on the top of my camera that tells me how many shots I can save on this memory card, right? Now, if you go in there and you change it to RAW, then two things are going to happen. First thing that's going to happen is you're going to see that number of pictures you're going to take is going to go way down because all the files are bigger, right? So that's the first thing that's going to happen. The other thing that's going to happen is you're going to see there's an option to be able to now pick your bit depth on your RAW pictures, where if you're in JPEG, it doesn't give you the option. You go into RAW, then it's going to, a little window pops up. Oh, well, do you want to save it? I can save mine as either 12 or 14 bit. Okay, I always go.
And this is in the camera. You said this is in the camera. So when I switch my camera to RAW, I've never seen the other option, or at least I never paid attention.
Yeah, it'll give you the option. Well, and every camera is a little bit different, so I don't want to say definitely it's there, but for reasonably good professional cameras, it'll give the option to pick out then, okay, if you want to shoot RAW now, you tell me how much you want to get. So I've got the option for 12 or 14. I always choose 14 because I figure if you're going to go big, go big or go home kind of thing. I can always throw out data, and memory cards these days, even with at 36 megapixel pictures in uncompressed RAW, I can still do like 600-700 pictures on a memory card, which is more than enough for me to be able to shoot a wedding. So
Deb, what are you shooting with? I forgot.
I got the Canon R6 mirrorless.
Because it might be down, there might be in those, in those hidden preferences down where you control beyond what you see. Look in there and see if there's spots where you can change that. Because I notice on mine, there's this veil, and then you open up this veil, and it gives you more control, and it goes deeper as you go through. So
what I found really handy, I'm a YouTube fan.
Yes.
Put the question into YouTube and it'll pop you right there.
Exactly. On the Canon website too, you can put the question in there, and it'll tell you where to go.
That's interesting. That's why I was like, oh, okay, I didn't know that. But
one thing that's true though is that if you don't capture the data in the camera, then it's awfully hard to try to build that kind of additional gradation or fineness later on, because you're already working with something that's already fragmented.
So if you're just changing, well, I guess I would have to look at my camera. So if I'm just changing probably to just RAW because I'm not going any deeper, I would need to find out, I guess, what
type of RAW files you can save. Yeah.
Okay.
And that would just probably open up a whole gamut of information you may not want to know.
Right.
I'd rather be in a position where I can throw out data than I'm starving for data.
Yeah.
No.
Corey, you've been pretty quiet, dude. Got any questions there?
Well, the first half of the video, I had my baby son with me, and I was trying to put him to sleep. So I was like, he might make some noise. I'm gonna stay quiet. I was really intrigued by the bit depth. That's what I took notes on. Like I said, I had him, and I was trying to see. I was getting a little fuzzy on you had the slide with the eye, and it went from I think it went from 8 to 16 to I can't remember the last one.
1 to 8 to 16. Yeah.
Okay, that was the part I had a little bit of questions on. Basically, well, I just needed clarity on. So when you get to 8 bits, you can actually start to get color, correct?
Okay, so can you see it there now?
Yes, I can.
Yeah. So if you're up here at 1 bit, it's either black or white. At 8 bit, I've got 256 levels going from black to white. Okay. And what that lets me is that gives me gradation now. I can have grays, lots of different grays in between and everything, but it's still all just black and white. Okay. It's only when I apply that level from black to white against red, green, and blue that I can create a color picture now. Okay, but that's still all 8-bit. It gives me 256 levels of red, which means in the picture, you may still have areas that are all the same color because you've only got 256 levels, right? But at least you've got color now incorporated. It's when you get up to the 14-bit now that it gives you the 16,384 levels of brightness for each one of those colors. And so when you take your 16,384 levels of brightness for each one of those colors and map that against all the other possibilities of the same levels for the other 2 colors, it turns out that 16,384 times 16,384 times 16,384 gives you 4.4 trillion colors to look at. But and it's not at that point, it's not the colors so much that you're looking at, the accuracy of the color, as much as the ability to spatially change the intensity from one area to the next is now the same for all 3 of those colors, and gives you that many more steps in the gradation from black to white, so you can really capture the slight changes in brightness from the upper of the eyelid to the middle of the eyelid to the bottom, that kind of stuff. So it's more the brightness across the whole picture that you derive your benefit from at that point, because your eye can't distinguish 4.4 trillion colors. I mean, that's kind of irrelevant at that point. But does that make sense?
Yes, thank you for that, because I really did need that. I couldn't hear. He was, like I said, starting to make noise.
If you'd like, I will go ahead and put the video or put the presentation out there for you guys to look at too, if you'd like to do that.
Yes, please.
Cool. Mia?
Yeah, I was going to say too, if you're, and a lot of us are and aren't, it depends. But if you're ever interested in competition and you need to be working with these files and you're dodging and burning and stuff, you need the most information there, because if you start taking away and you start trying to burn something in, you've got to have something to work with it to begin with, or you just sizzle it up to nothing or wash it away. And either way, and you've got to have that in those scenarios. And, being print-based, I want to be able to have as much as I can. So when they look at that image across the room, it just has that dynamic of dimension, love, and everything built in already. Give me more.
Right.
I want more.
Chris? Oh, you're muted.
Sorry. Two things real quick. First, I wanted to thank you, Ron. It was a great presentation. Great discussion today, everybody. Second thing is off topic a little bit, and Deb may have information on this for me, but I'm going to plug Sean Lee and Multicultural Photographers, Professional Photographers, has a great program this evening, especially if you're shooting out of your home. Can you refresh my memory, Deb, on what time that is?
Yes, I'm pulling it up right now. It is with Marnie. How do you pronounce her last name?
Claggett. Yeah.
Yep.
Claggett. And it's this evening at 6 p.m. And I'll put the link. I'll go ahead and put the link in the group.
I've seen her program at Imaging, seen this program at Imaging. And if you're shooting out of your home, it is an awesome program to kind of give you some ideas on how to maximize your space and how to work out of your home. And one of the major advantages, as some of us already know, is if you're working out of your home, you have reduced your overhead by significant amounts. Right, Sally?
Well, Sally doesn't know because she's never at her studio. She's always out doing something exciting.
So I have a quick plug as well, if you don't mind. So one of the things that I find that CPP doesn't teach you is how you talk to clients, how you interact, how you get them to get the pose and get that natural expression. Well, on Wednesday night, we have Carolyn Tran. She's an awesome wedding photographer, So as an example, because she had no weddings last year and she has done them up and down the California coast at every venue, she switched to 15-minute sessions with families. And on one weekend, she still did $30,000. So this is someone that knows how to talk to people to get that thing that they just love. And so I booked her for Wednesday night for our PPA affiliate. And I'm going to put the event in the chat. And if you want to join us, please do. It's California time. So East Coast, you might have to stay up late. But she normally does these. We book these people as paid presenters because their work doesn't go on the web on YouTube. You have to, subscribe and do their classes, etc. So I really recommend it. So, and also if you look at her website, that's in the link. You'll see the kind of lovely airy style, lots of light, etc. That's so fashionable these days. So she's going to tell you, it's called pickup points. So you tell the people the thing that you need them to do, and then they do the rest. Their emotion just comes out because they're enjoying the session. And so I hope you can come and join us then. Thanks.
Are these for
John,
PPA members as well? Can you get your
No,
points?
actually, well, during COVID, we opened our program for free to non-members as well. So there's no charge. You just register and show up.
Cool. Thank you, John.
You will need to register because we send you the Zoom link after you're
Right.
registered.
Hey, John, I want to echo your sentiment there because PPA conferences last year, one of the things I picked up was a great way to get two people to smile at each other and have a natural smile is to ask, and you don't even have to tell them, ask them who plays better, who's better at video games, and they will naturally look at each other and start smiling.
If they play.
Well, but normally they do. So they'll look at, and that's the moment you want to capture. And the really cool thing is that is a great way, rather than trying to tell them, now look at each other, now smile, you know, you're capturing the emotion at its source as opposed to trying to incorporating it into a pose. And I thought, so I'm thinking that's a lot of what she'll be talking about. So I'm in, count me in.
Great. The one that I use is look at her nose and tell her in your most sexy voice what you have for breakfast. Exactly. You're not looking her ear because then you get hidden in the shadow. But if you tell it to her nose, but they're just examples of the things that I found trying to work with customers was what is the patter, because people have a different style. And some it's very formal and dry, you know, whatever. And other people, you say, pretend you just lick the Eiffel Tower or whatever. And these things are unusual, and so they're natural. The responses.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the stuff.
To see you on Wednesday.
And that's all the stuff that will not be on the CPP exam, but you benefit by being here today.
That's all the stuff that's going to help you establish that experience that they have with you. And that's what they're buying the experience nowadays as well. You know, it's more than just a final printed image, because if you can capture that experience somehow inside that image, which is how we get there with all these cues, then, you know, and if you're working with a client, like for instance, I'm going to say this, my daughter, when my grandson was really little, the one that had the triple organ transplant, when he was really little, they had to spend in it, you know, like 6, 7, 8 months at a time away from their home. But we wanted images. So we hired someone in the area. And these two kids, I mean, they were already, you know, here with the stress. They didn't need to go into a studio and do all of this stuff, right? So they said, okay, go to this park and we will capture you mostly at a distance and let you just be a family. And the most beautiful parts of that whole experience was when my daughter came back to me and, you know, via telephone, obviously 1,700 miles away. And I said, so how did it go for you? What did you think on your end? And she said, the experience was well worth it. We got to get out. We weren't in the hospital, but we didn't feel like there was a camera in our face the whole time. And I said, good, I'm glad that you felt that way. Of course, the images turned out great because we all, as family members, other, you know, 3 sets of grandparents coming in, we paid for the experience. So they could have these images of him when he was, you know, that little and they were a family. And that is probably the biggest message that I think she understood at the time too, was it doesn't have to be all posy and stuff. It kind of opened her mind to what the future of her photographs could look like as well.
It's interesting because John, you're just talking about some helpful ways of being able to get people to do things you want them to do. And although it isn't, quote, you're not posing them, but you're creating a pose by guiding them to the right thought process. And I think that's the really key thing about that. That's what part of being the professional photographer is all about, is having those tools to help get your clients to do what they need to get the image that they're looking for. And versus those people who are not professionals, who don't have that skill. That's why they're paying you the money they do, is because you know how to use that tool to get the image that they're looking for. And I think John's program down there sounds like it builds on that, and it's going to be a great augmentation. I really encourage everybody to try to attend that. I've got it on my calendar now.
It's tonight, yes.
Wednesday.
Wednesday. Okay, cool. either.
Marnie Cleggett is tonight with
Tonight.
Matt.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Yeah. I'm in her Facebook group. So couldn't
Sounds
spit
good.
it out.
Thank you for organizing this, Chris. This is a great addition for people who are studying, and honestly, I get a lot out of listening to the other CPPs out here, the other liaisons too. So it's good all the way around.
Awesome. Awesome.
So,
All righty, guys. Well, we're into overtime, and I don't want to kick anybody off, but if you have any last minute burning desire questions, we're open for discussion.
yeah. If you want to talk with me more about this topic or others, you can reach me at ronjrice@gmail.com or ron@rjricephotography.com. Either one. I'm love to talk about this stuff.
Ron, can you put that in the chat right
Oh,
quick?
yeah.
Your email. Thank you.
Oh, I'm scheduling in-person CPP exams later this month. Yeah.
Oh, that's good. I got mine scheduled September 11th.
Mine are in July. Actually,
Yeah.
I'm gonna do one in July, and then I'm doing one also in September. So
There you go.
Yes.
More.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm off. Lovely to
Okay.
see everybody. Have a great day. Hope to
Bye,
see you tomorrow night.
thanks,
everybody.
guys.
All right,
guys.
thanks, guys. Thanks, everybody.
good
Nice to
week.
meet you.
Bye.
See you later, Sally.